Hey there. All right, I'm going to be upfront with this video. This one's going to be entirely political. So if you don't care about that sort of stuff, or you don't want to listen to that, or you don't find it relaxing, because honestly, it really isn't relaxing, that's fine. Honestly, this video is not so much about ASMR. Obviously, I'm doing it in the style of ASMR because I'm an ASMR channel. But yes, this is just going to be kind of a political video. So yeah, feel free to click off. But I think what I'm going to say is important to hear, and it's important to talk about, which is why I'm doing so. Now, I'm going to be talking about what's been happening recently with the federal government's deportations of certain individuals, specifically to El Salvador. Now, a lot of this discussion was spurred by the accidental deportation of an individual named Kilmar or something or other. I don't know, that's his first name. I don't know his full name. And as a result of those discussions, there's been what's the word? Not elaborations. What is the word? I can't think of the word. New information has come out from the president himself, where he has talked about being open and, if anything, eager to use this method of deportation to what is essentially a concentration camp. Let's be real. It's just a mega prison where, the prisons in the United States are, they're a place where we put criminals, bad people, but they are also meant to be somewhat of a rehabilitation center. Now, obviously, we have lots of different prisons, each of which house lots of different types of criminals, and you will have really, really bad prisons, even in America, where we send the worst of the worst, where we're not really attempting to rehabilitate anyone. We're basically just sending them there to get them out of society, right? But it's all within America. This particular prison in El Salvador, where they've been sending a lot of these illegal immigrants, is not a rehabilitation center. It is a place for you to go and die. So yes. Now, to be fair, I want it to be clear up front that I am not really in any way opposed to deporting illegal immigrants. Now, deporting them specifically to a maximum security foreign prison concentration camp is little overkill if the person that is an illegal immigrant is just an illegal immigrant and that's it, I suppose they have broken the law, but sending them to a prison in another country is perhaps a bit excessive. But if they're like this really terrible criminal, they're a gangster or something, or, a murderer, whatever, drug trafficker, whatever, it is what it is. If they're here illegally, then yes, I think they probably should be removed. I don't have any problems with that. I think people, if they want to live in America, should come legally. Now, I do think that there is a gray area, right? Asylum seekers and refugees, that sort of thing, where the process of being admitted to a country is a little different, and they might not be considered legal immigrants, but calling them illegal immigrants and saying that they are a burden on our society and stuff like that, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. And I definitely don't agree with those particular people being sent, again, to what is essentially a concentration camp. So that's just my opinions on that specifically. Now, again, a lot of this discussion talking about sending people to foreign prisons and stuff like that, like I said, was spurred by this particular individual, Kilmar, whatever his name is. Now, again, if I'm being completely honest, I really don't care about this particular guy. I hear lots of conflicting information about who this individual is. Some sources say that he is for sure a criminal, for sure a gangster in a foreign gang that is now labeled as a foreign terrorist organization. I've heard sources that say that he was a law-abiding citizen that escaped a life of crime. Not necessarily that he was a part of it, but he was being pressured, and his family was being pressured to, participate in criminal activity, so he fled to America. I've heard that apparently he beat his wife. So, whether or not this particular individual is someone that you should, revere or empathize with, whatever, it's almost impossible to know. There's just too much noise from both sides. One side's going to make him out to be the saint. One side's going to make him out to be a demon. Who really knows, right? The fact of the matter is I don't care. But what I absolutely care about is talks of U.S. citizens being sent to foreign prisons in foreign countries that are not a part of America. El Salvador is not a part of America. There are U.S. territories that are not technically states, like Puerto Rico, for instance, although there's obviously been lots of talks about Puerto Rico becoming a state, but that probably won't happen anytime soon. Either way, there are technically other foreign territories that are still within, the jurisdiction of the United States, but El Salvador is not one of them. And again, the conditions of this particular prison that they would be sending them to is futile, to say the least. I mean, it is bleak. It is bleak. Now, currently, and this is how they get you, right? Currently, they're talking about just sending the worst of U.S. criminals, right? People that are U.S. citizens but are clearly just too far gone. And so people are going to look at that and say, well, why would you have any problem with us getting rid of these people? I mean, if anything, they're going to be in prison for life in America. So what? They're just going to be a burden on our tax system. They're going to be getting tax dollars because of, they're spending time in prison and they need food and water and stuff. Because we treat people humanely here, even our criminals, at least somewhat. So that's the argument. It's like, oh, they're just talking about criminals, Connor. They're just talking about the worst of the worst. But no, you cannot give wiggle room on something like this. It is a classic strategy of degrading a society's morals and degrading their understanding of what is normal, degrading normalcy. Once you get comfortable with the idea of sending our worst of the worst to another country's concentration camp, what next? Okay, well now we don't have any more worst of the worst, so the people that were just kind of bad are now technically the worst of the worst if you just look at the broad spectrum, so I guess we might as well send them too. And then we empty out all of our prisons, and then you have a federal government administration where they get to decide who's a criminal now. Maybe this administration decides that being gay makes you a criminal, and maybe that is what gets you sent to an El Salvadorian concentration camp. Maybe being trans. I mean, this administration has not made it, I guess I should say they have made it pretty clear that they are not particularly big fans of trans people. So it doesn't seem like that big of a stretch to me to think that at some point, years down the line, that if they've made a precedent of sending criminals to El Salvador concentration camps, that maybe that includes trans people. Just regular law-abiding, normal-ass people that, have done nothing wrong. That's where the problems really start to appear. That's why you can't do this. That's why you cannot say, let's just send the worst of the worst. It doesn't work that way. There is no legal precedent for that. All right. And that's why, because crime is defined by us. It's not necessarily, there are things that most people will agree on are black and white, such as murder, right? Yes, murder is bad. But when it comes to how bad of a criminal someone is, that's defined by language, and language is ambiguous, which means it can be changed. It can be discussed. That's what we're seeing with this current administration. They're changing a lot of things. This administration has banned the use of, I don't know if banned is the correct word. I think they want to ban, but there was a executive order made that restricted and heavily, pushed people away from using certain words, such as there was like the word sex was on there, the word woman was on there, the word DEI, if that's even a word, it's an abbreviation. It was a list of like 200 words or something like that that have now been banned by this administration. So much for free speech, right? So the whole idea that language is ambiguous and anyone can be, labeled anything under the guise of ambiguity of language is a real concern, a genuine concern. And it's happening right now. If we allow something like this to get started, where they are allowed to send the worst of the worst to El Salvador, or any country for that matter, it doesn't have to be El Salvador, it will have been a massive degradation of this country's integrity. It's also just wild to me that, for the longest time, I would say one of the defining characteristics of what it meant to be a conservative was this disdain for federal overreach. A lot of conservatives tout state rights and how, the federal government shouldn't have so much power. They often cite things like 1984 and Big Brother and the whole idea that you're just getting spied on all the time and they control the narrative of everything and that sort of stuff, Whether or not you think that that's true and that's a good thing or a bad thing, it doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is that conservatives, for the most part, have pretty regularly used that as a stance on why they believe certain things, So I find it weird that this party is now seemingly just perfectly okay with the idea of the federal government getting to define who is a worst of the worst criminal and then sending them away to a concentration camp. That just doesn't make sense. Those two things cannot coalesce. They cannot again, I can't think of the word. They cannot exist at the same time. Either you distrust the federal government and you think that its power should be heavily limited in favor of more state and local governments governing the state and local people of a certain area, or you're okay with the federal government defining and sending away criminals to a concentration camp. You can't agree with both at the same time. So I'm left with, there's one of two situations, one of two options, one of two possibilities, where either the conservative side has just been lying this whole time, where they don't really care about federal overreach and stuff like that. It's just that when it's a government administration that they don't like, that's when they don't like the federal government. But when it's, when the Republicans have control of the House and the Senate and the executive branch and potentially even the judicial branch, although I'm not 100% sure about that, that's when it's okay. That's when the federal government can have all the power they want. I mean, I trust them. I think they have my best interest in mind. It just doesn't make any goddamn sense, right? Now, I mean, I am broadly, assigning values to an entire group of people, which is extremely diverse. There are millions and millions of conservatives in America. So it is feasible to assume that a good portion of them potentially fully disagree with this idea of sending away our worst of the worst. And it is unfair of me to label them all as huge hypocrites, because some of them surely are not. There are probably plenty of conservatives that have said for years and continue to agree that the federal government having lots and lots of power is a bad thing, but also agree that the federal government, therefore having the ability to send criminals to El Salvador, is also a very, very bad thing. To those people, I give a thumbs up for sticking to your values at the very least. If you're a spineless idiot that has said for years that you disagree with the federal government having power, at least as much power as it has currently, but now you are seemingly okay with everything that's happening in the federal government right now, you are an idiot, and just a hypocrite of the largest degree. And it's sad, it's really quite sad. But what can you do, right? Except for vote, which many people didn't do. As I said in my video, which I made shortly after the election, people touted the 2024 election as this massive landslide for Republicans, but it really wasn't. If anything, it was a massive landslide for apathy. It seems like people don't care, or at the very least, they don't think that voting makes a difference, so therefore, I'm not going to vote. More than ever, people didn't vote in the last election. The election numbers for both sides, both Republican and Democrat, and third parties you can basically ignore because they make up such a minuscule fraction of the overall vote. It was less. It was less for both sides. Both sides received fewer votes than in the past. Fewer people voted in general. Now, obviously, fewer Republicans didn't vote than Democrats, which is why we got a Republican elect. But to say that, this is what most people wanted is just inaccurate, because it's not. Most people cast their vote by ignoring the ballot box, which is sad, because now we live in a world where this is the threat. And it is a massive threat, whether or not you want to believe it. There's a lot of people who act like stuff never happens. Nothing ever happens, right? I would say that is a very privileged stance, where things are constantly happening. But if they don't massively affect you, you just don't think that they are. That's just the way it goes, right? And like I said, if this gets rolling, if this gets moving, if they actually start to fulfill this promise or this idea that they have currently of sending the worst of the worst to El Salvador, you will undoubtedly see an erosion of that definition. What defines a person as being worst of the worst? I mean, can you even define it now before they've even done anything? Oh, well, a serial killer that's murdered more than 5 people, let's say. Those people are the worst of the worst. Okay, what about non-murder crime like sex trafficking or rape or any number of things? What about those? Are those the worst of the worst? Well, those things are pretty bad, right? Well, let's see. But where's the cutoff? The law is very ambiguous. It has lots of gray area, but people are, you're a whole person. And at a certain point, a statistic of people on a spreadsheet of criminals in prison, you have to make that cutoff where this person gets sent and this person does not. Where do you put the line? You can't fucking define it. You just fucking can't. There is no point at which it just logically makes sense. Oh, yeah, we put the line right there. there is no point. It cannot be defined. Language is too ambiguous, and morals are too ambiguous. People don't agree on what exactly is moral. There are things, yes, that can be agreed upon by most, but there is almost nothing that can be agreed upon morally by everyone. It's just too dangerous. It's sad. It's really fucking sad to see what's happening. A lot of people have been expressing surprise at just how fast this has happened. And I guess to a degree I am also surprised. But really, I mean, come on. I don't know. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is that months ago you were supposed to vote for the other candidate so that this doesn't happen. And look, the side that's in control now will say, well, if they had been voted for, we would have been in the same situation or worse, or things would be worse. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. You don't know shit. You don't know shit. You cannot possibly say that, because no one can see the fucking future. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Is there anything that can be done now? I mean, at this point, your only option is to protest, make your voice heard, make it clear that this is not okay. Will that do much good in the position we're in? Who's to say, really? I mean, it really does seem quite futile because of the position we're in, where their administration has control of almost every branch of the government, and it seems like no one is interested in standing up against it. I mean, a big part of the whole Doge program, where they fired a bunch of people, and Donald Trump personally fired members of the staff immediately surrounding him. I mean, that in and of itself isn't necessarily too uncommon, you know. Every president is going to have their own cabinet with selected individuals. But you factor that into what's happening, and it certainly looks bad. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not looking good. I'm not gonna lie. It's not looking good. Which is why you should have voted. If you didn't vote, that is. I mean, if you voted, then you did everything you could. I voted. I did everything I could. That's the power the people have, is the vote. This is a republic. We vote for our representatives and hope that they have our best interest in mind. And unfortunately, most people just didn't vote because they thought it didn't matter, and it clearly did matter. Now, I'm not going to sit here and act like Kamala Harris was the best candidate ever. Far from it. Far from it. But, yeah, any day. Any day. I would take her any day over what we have. Period. Easy. I think also what's disappointing about the whole situation isn't necessarily that it's happening, which is very disappointing in and of itself. But the most disappointing aspect of it isn't necessarily that it's happening and being perpetrated by these officials. Corrupt people are going to be corrupt, right? What's disappointing about it most is that so many people are okay with it, and if anything, are happy with it. That's the part that's really like disappointing. Like to know that we live in a society now where people are just okay with this sort of thing. Like this is good. Like you personally are okay with this. You're happy with what's happening. You think that what's happening is good. Like that's just disappointing to know that like I Like, your vote matters as much as I do. Clearly you are delusional if you think that what is happening is good, just objectively speaking. Hypocrisy aside, even if you, like I said, even if you hadn't for a long time been against the idea of strong federal government, to be okay with what's happening now is just objectively incorrect. Yeah, I mean, it's fascist. That's what it is. For a long time, I have been personally, and I think probably other people as well, have been personally hesitant to call the current administration fascist, because it does get overused a little bit. And I don't like to overuse words because they lose their meaning that way. If, boy who cried wolf, if you call someone fascist over and over again, eventually you degrade the meaning of the word to where it doesn't matter anymore. And I think, if anything, that's kind of been a shield for the other side, where it's like, well, if we just allow them to keep calling us that and we keep throwing up Sieg Heils on stages and stuff, then at a certain point it just becomes nonsense, right? So I've held off. I don't agree with much of what's been happening even prior to this whole situation. But I was not ready to call it fascist until now. What we are seeing is textbook fascism, if it gets employed. Now, I have no reason at this point in time to believe that it won't happen, which is why I'm treating it the way that I am. Of course, there is always the possibility that for whatever reason they don't end up going through with this. Maybe it does end up getting enough backlash. I don't know. It is a pretty new story at this point, so I'm not exactly sure on how everyone is reacting as a collective. I have seen lots of people voicing dissent with this whole idea of sending criminals to El Salvador. So maybe most people are not okay with that, conservatives included, and they'll just back down. They'll say, okay, guys, sorry, that was a mistake. We were just joking. We would never. We understand that's bad. We understand that that's fascism. Maybe that'll happen. But I have to assume, because of all of the executive orders that have been issued, hundreds, definitely over 100 at this point. I'm not exactly sure the number, but we're over 100 executive orders into this administration, and we're only 100 some days in. That's an executive order almost every day. It's probably more than that, honestly, because, like I said, I'm pretty sure there's been over 100 executive orders issued at this point. With the amount of change and overreach that's been happening, I have to assume that this is going to happen. If he says, hey, I want to send our homegrown criminals to El Salvador, I have to take him at his word and imagine that he's going to get it done. He's going to do that. So at this point, it's just about calling a spade a spade. Yeah, it's fascist. It is fascist. And it's sad to see that so many people are okay with that, especially the types of people that constantly argued that we're not fascist and fascism sucks. We fought against fascism, and then it comes to your front door and you let it right in. Like, what the fuck? I don't know. It's funny, but it's not funny. It's really tempting to make a big joke out of it as a coping mechanism, because comedy is one of the most effective ways that people cope with stuff. It's the whole reason you have like 9/11 jokes and shit like that, because you take a really dark thing and you make it funny, and then all of a sudden it kind of loses its power and you feel better about the whole situation, right? But whether or not it's just because it's too soon or just because it's just so bad, I just can't laugh about it. It's not funny anymore. It's just sad. So, yeah. I don't really know what else to say. I guess other than it sucks to suck. Of course, this had to happen when I'm growing up. But that's life, I guess, right? Yeah. If you are someone who sees what's going on and is okay with it or potentially likes it, I would urge you to take a closer look and think of things a little bit more critically. Think of the precedent that is being set, that if the federal government gets to define a criminal and they also get to send criminals to El Salvador to die, that poses a pretty big threat to freedom in this country, which I think everyone can agree is a really good thing. Having freedom and personal authority, that sort of stuff, personal liberty, right? Those are good things. So we shouldn't degrade those things if we can. So yeah, just think about it. Just use your brain a little bit and think like, okay, well maybe this ain't so great. Maybe I was wrong. I think that's another thing about the whole situation is I think a lot of people are just really unwilling to admit that they were wrong. And I get it. I'm the same way, right? It's never easy to say I was wrong. So I think you have a lot of people right now that are like, they're probably quite baffled by what's happening, but they're like, no. I made the right choice. I have to have made the right choice. Because if I made the wrong choice and I led our country into a shithole dumpster fire, I don't know if I could live with myself. I don't know if I could handle that emotionally and mentally. That would take a really huge physical toll on my being. So it's just easier for me to just go along with it. Everything they're doing is perfectly good because I voted for it and I made it happen. So in a way, what they're doing is like me, like I made it happen. And so like if it's bad, then that would make me a bad person. And so like I just can't accept that. So I'm just going to go along with it. For my own psyche, I'm just going to go along with it. Honestly, I think that that's probably a big part of what's happening right now. So if that is you, I highly urge you to see the light. Look, you made a mistake. People make mistakes. It happens. All right. I've made mistakes. You're going to make more mistakes. That's life. But you got to learn, right? You got to learn from your mistakes. You got to understand that what you've done is a mistake. In this case, a massive mistake that will undoubtedly affect, if not having already affected, millions of people. But a mistake is a mistake. I'm willing to let bygones be bygones if you admit that what you've done is a mistake and you say, all right, I'll try to be better. Because that's really all anyone can expect at this point, right? If you do that and you actually make steps towards being a better person and making brighter decisions and using your brain and thinking more logically, then good on you. It's still disappointing that you made the decision in the first place because the signs were there beforehand. I mean, to say that like this is coming completely out of left field, nobody expected this. No, not really. That's not necessarily true. It was, like people have said, it's happened a lot faster than maybe we expected. But it was pretty expected. The signs were there. So the fact that you made the decision in the first place is disappointing. But again, if you're going to try and change, if you're going to try and learn from this experience, then there you go. I guess at least it wasn't a complete loss. The worst thing you can do in a situation like this is stay fixed in your position and stay there the whole time. Steadfast. I will not change my opinion. In light of new evidence that proves that I have made a massive mistake, I will believe that I made the right call. That's the worst thing you could do. So don't do that. Yeah. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I know it wasn't relaxing. I know it was sad. And I know it was, it wasn't a fun one. But this stuff matters to me, and it should matter to you too, especially if you live in America. If you don't live in America, I suppose it doesn't necessarily matter, although America is the most influential country in the world. At least it was before this administration, but that's, a discussion for another time, I suppose. So this does still have the ability to impact you personally, even if you aren't American, but especially if you're American. Yeah. Sorry. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you later.